Larry, welcome to Universidad Francisco Marroquín.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Larry, you have an upcoming book coming out. Would you like to tell us a little about it?
Okay, it's called The Clash of Economic Ideas, and it's about the great policy debates and experiments of the last 100 years. So it's an attempt to interest people in the history of economics by focusing on the parts of economics that are relevant to policy debates, and particularly to current policy debates, but giving them some idea of where the contending sides are drawing their inspiration. So I talk about the socialist calculation debate and the arguments of Mises and Hayek. The Austrian theory of the business cycle figures in the chapter that begins with the Roaring Twenties. And so I progressed like that through the last 100 years, starting with a historical episode and then talking about the debate among economists, Keynesians against Austrians, Marxists against neoclassical economists, that accompany these experiments, these debates, economists trying to understand what's happening, or economists proposing reforms. The nationalizations of Great Britain after the war is the focus of one chapter, and the roots of that in the Fabian socialists who agitated for nationalizations for many decades. And in the post-war period, I talk about the Bretton Woods system, how it arose, what the arguments in favor of the gold standard had been, how the Keynesian arguments for the Bretton Woods system politically triumphed. And the last chapter, which I just wrote a few months ago, is about the current sovereign debt crisis in Europe and the roots of that in the Keynesian doctrine that budget deficits are just a very pleasant thing to do. They can only help the economy grow faster. We're now finding out that that was a dangerous message. So it's due out in April 2012 from Cambridge University Press. And currently I'm proofreading the edited manuscript, so I hope I'm not holding it up, but that's when it should appear. There's been a lot of interest in the history of economic thought recently. There's a book on Hayek and Keynes by, Keynes Hayek by Nicholas Wapshott. Sylvia Nasser has a new book on the story of economic genius. Those are written by journalists, and they're more about the biographies of economists, but mine is more focused on the ideas and how they clashed and how they were reformulated in light of the criticism of each side, and why economists today still disagree about so much.
Well, Larry, you're recognized for your work in monetary theory and money, and particularly in banking and what is known as the free banking school. You mentioned this ongoing debate, and it's maybe personified in the debate between Keynes and Hayek. What can we learn from that debate in light of the events of the past few years, particularly the financial crisis in basically in the United States in 2007, 2008, and now the sovereign debt crisis in Europe?
Well, I think we learn a lot from Hayek, especially. And what Hayek warned us about was that it's very dangerous to have a central bank that injects credit at every opportunity, that leads to distorted interest rates, that leads to investment in the wrong things. I think Hayek's theory, interest in Hayek's theory was dormant for a long time because we were in what was called the Great Moderation. There didn't seem to be so many business cycles. It's made a comeback in the recent boom and bust because it so well fits this pattern of cheap credit, the Federal Reserve System holding interest rates very low for several years, a housing bubble building up, asset prices rising in the housing industry, lots of overconstruction, and then the whole thing bursting because, as Hayek warned us, it's unsustainable when you're trying to invest more than the economy is actually saving. You can temporarily paper over the difference by printing money, but the real resources just won't be there. And so we've discovered that a lot of the wealth that homeowners thought they had wasn't really there. It was just paper wealth. And now we're in the middle of trying to reconstruct the economy, but there's a lot of recalculation necessary because the wealth that people thought they had, they didn't have. Unfortunately, the Federal Reserve System seems to be trying to obstruct the process of recovery by returning to a period of ultra-low interest rates and trying to prevent house prices from adjusting to where they need to be. And the fiscal policy in the United States, bailing out General Motors, bailing out some of the large banks, seems to be designed to perpetuate the firms that made the mistakes during the boom. So it seems to me we need to take on board Hayek's message that to recover, the economy needs to return to a sound footing, which means not continuing the wrong investments, but letting resources flow to where they can be sustainably invested. In Hayek's Nobel Prize lecture, he warned us about what he called the pretense of knowledge, which is the mistake economists make when they imagine they know how to fine-tune the economy. And I think it's pretty clear that the great moderation was actually fairly hollow, that the central banks had not actually figured it all out. And now we're living with the consequences of that.